Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Hello and welcome to the Fintelekt ABA webinar on business compliance. Thank you so much to the Asian Bankers Association, especially Meg Moreno and Amador Honrado there for partnering with Fintelekt again for this webinar. For those of you that haven't met me virtually or personally before, my name is Shirish Pathak. I head Fintelekt, and it is my pleasure to be your host and moderator for the session today. So today's webinar will be more of an interactive panel discussion, and I'm joined by three very experienced and talented professionals. Boren Kork, who's the Chief Legal and Compliance Officer at J Trust Royal Bank from Cambodia. Mohammad Abdullah Al Mamun, who's the Deputy Managing Director of Dutch-Bangla Bank from Bangladesh, and Noel Christopher Casuncad, who's the Chief Compliance Officer and Head of Legal at Starpay Corporation from the Philippines. So as you can see, we've got a very multicultural and diverse set of panelists, which is great because we have people from so many countries attending this webinar today. Now, as you all know, the true cost of non-compliance, isn't just limited to regulatory fines, but also includes reputation damage, loss of customers, loss of potential investors, and maybe some business disruption. And business teams are really the first line of defense and need to be adept at managing risks and staying compliant with regulations. So, you as a bank or financial institution or a reporting entity or covered person must equip the business with the required understanding of the AML CFT compliance rules to detect and prevent activities that can potentially pose a risk to the institution. And therefore, it's imperative that business teams and customer-facing staff really understand the spirit behind compliance and inculcate this in their day-to-day activity. So we'll speak a bit about this and maybe a bit more on the webinar today. And I think at this time, I would like to welcome our panelists, Boren, Mamun, and Noel. Welcome to the webinar. And may I request each of you to very quickly say a few words about yourselves, about your current role, maybe a bit about your past experience. Maybe Boren, ladies first. So can we start with you? Boren, you're on mute.
And good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Boren, as you see written here. I'm working for J Trust Royal Bank, previously known as ANZ Royal Bank, and as the Chief Legal and Compliance Officer. My role and responsibilities cover the legal, company secretary, regulatory compliance, and also the financial crime compliance, including AML and CFT. So very nice and honored to be on the panel here with two other respected speakers and also Shirish as the facilitator. Thank you.
Thanks, Boren. Mamun, can we have you next?
Hi, good afternoon and good morning, everybody. This is Abdullah Mamun. I'm the Chief Anti-Money and Compliance Officer of Dutch-Bangla Bank. I worked for HSBC for 16 years, then Standard Chartered for 4 years, and now for the local Dutch-Bangla Bank for around 6 years. So I had the opportunity to work with the local regulator in formulating the first AML guideline for the banks. And also I'm an active past secretary for local AML association ECOM. And we have been working with the Fintelekt and EVA in few instances in the past. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mamun. Noel, can we have a few words about you?
Good day, everyone. My name is Noel Christopher Casuncad. I am the incumbent Chief Compliance Officer and Head of Legal of Starpay Corporation. So here in the Philippines. So Starpay Corporation is one of the leading electronic money issuers and operators of payment system in our country. So before I was connected with Starpay, I worked for Resorts World Manila. So that's one of the biggest integrated resorts in the Philippines. I've also worked for a Taiwanese bank, Manila branch, and a law firm. So I'm glad to be here for you to, hopefully, we can share some knowledge to our participants. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Noel. And so, let's get right into the session. So participants, what we'll do is I'm going to ask a set of questions to the panelists and get their views. And if any of you have any questions as the session goes forward, please post it in the Q&A section. You'll see a button at the bottom of your screen. to post it. And if you have any other comments, you can put it in chat. But the Q&A box really is the one that you should be posting questions in, and we will take it towards the end of the session. So again, in the spirit of ladies first, let me ask Boren the first question. So Boren, business teams are the first line of defense, as I mentioned earlier, and need to be aware of AML CFT regulations of the country that they operate in. Now, whether organizations operate locally or globally, how should the customer-facing staff or the branch staff keep up with the ever-changing regulatory landscape and help the bank or organization to stay compliant? What are your views on this?
Thank you for the question, Shirish. Well, I usually compare doing business with driving on the road. Probably this is the easiest metaphor, as almost everyone can drive. So the moment you hand the wheel and you push the gear, you should at least understand the basics of the traffic rules and regulation, right? At least you should know the meaning of the traffic light. At least you should know whether you should drive on the left or on the right. And at least you should understand the traffic sign. So doing business is the same. If you do the business, you should understand at least the basic rule of and regulation where you operate the business in. Otherwise, I think you can imagine what will you end up. If you don't know, imagine if you don't know the traffic rule and you drive on the road, I think you can imagine what you will end up with. And of course, it does not take your lawyer license or legal degree to drive or to do the business, but understanding the rules of driving or doing the business will make your drive or your business safe and easy. Also, there is a general principle in law subject. I think people with legal background would know the general principle in French language saying that nul n'est censé ignorer la loi, meaning in English, no one is supposed to ignore the law. So same applies to the business. When you do the business, you are not supposed to ignore the law or regulation, and you cannot claim that you commit wrongdoing because you don't know the regulations. This explains why the first line of defense needs to understand and be aware of the regulation governing their business, especially the AML and CFT regulation if you are in the financial sector particularly. And to get the first line of defense aware of ever-changing regulations, there must be someone, I said someone's with us, keep telling them. And then that someone's a compliance officer whose one of the key role is to keep the business up to date of the new or change or updated regulations. And on top of that, regular training or reminder of the institution's obligation under AML and CFT regulation is something compliance officer must do to help the organization and everyone individually stay compliant. So this is my view. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Boren. Noel, if I may move the same question to you, what are your views on this?
Yes, for me, it is important first that management cultivates culture of compliance, and the management with the board should ensure that regulations are properly monitored, disseminated, and discussed with our customer-facing staff or frontliners. So I believe that if there is a culture of compliance, frontliners would be conscious or deliberate in complying with their obligations, specifically AML regulations, which of course it would redound to the betterment of the level of compliance of a specific entity. So for practicality purposes, frontliners should be given materials. They should have ready access to the copy of regulations, and for me, if possible, the regulation should be discussed and explained in a simple manner or in layman's term for them to better appreciate and understand the regulations. So we always say awareness, awareness, awareness. So it means that we should encourage frontliners to continually ask questions or clarifications and then to encourage them for continuous learnings. So of course, aside from reading, from training, then we can also provide practical exercises which may be given to our frontliners or customer-facing staff to assess their comprehension of the regulations and to encourage them to not simply read the regulations, but to better understand and to appreciate how to apply those regulations. So in addition to that, we can also use or tap the assistance of our internal audit department as a third line of defense to check compliance and conformance of our frontliners with the rules and regulations and standards. And since we are talking about training, then why not tap the potential of technology to better disseminate matters related to compliance, including providing exams or practical exercises. Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. Mamun, if I may come to you, do you think there is a tick the box mentality in some sectors, right? Which, especially those which are the new reporting entity or covered person sectors, for example, DNFBBs or let's say real estate or casinos, and of course in maybe a large majority of the banks as well, right? How do you think one should actually build an effective culture of compliance amongst the business teams, and how can you really enforce it? Mamun?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Shirish. Like you rightly said, like there is a sort of a culture of tick the box in some of the news sectors, and which actually take the advantage of the circumstances. Like in most of the region, like also in Bangladesh, like the new sectors or the new inventions or the new business lines that emerge pretty much quickly, but the associated law and regulations actually were not promulgated before or well thought of before, and rather those are a bit reactive and to some extent on trial and error basis. Like even we've faced some problem in Bangladesh on mobile banking, asset banking, in e-commerce, especially during the pandemic, and also during this recent dollar crunch, like on the unauthorized forex dealing or the unauthorized money exchange, digital hundi, digital cryptocurrency issues, and some of the people also taking the advantage of freelancing. So, and earlier we also faced some problem on the ML, multi-level marketing, cooperatives, and DNFBPS that you mentioned. Like, so the problem is actually the minimum compliance standards that they added with their trade license or with their basic registration, but the detailed policy procedures actually were not there. And similarly, there has been no sort of an regulatory supervision at the grassroots level, and as you can see that the circumstances are a bit on the digital side. So these are pretty much on concern on elusiveness, anonymity, rapidity. So these are pretty much fast, and to some extent, people are innocent and do have some greediness on their part. So they jump on those issues. So to address those issues, the culture of compliance, which is nowadays are treated as sort of a shallow conformity, rather we should build that culture as a sort of an internalization, which should be a sort of a deep conformity. So that needs to be built in the day-to-day culture so that we can have that culture, and we need to make it understand to the business people, and obviously that should come from the tone from the top, that the policy, procedure, and etc. should be made in such a way so that the standard operating procedure or the flowcharts has to be pretty much clear and digestible to the business people, so that they don't go for the tick the box issue. And obviously there should be risk and reward based approach, and which actually will benefit both the business line and the compliance people. So I believe that using the right tone from the top and building trust among the staff, and so that we can also take the right tool to demonstrate that we are actually going to the right direction.
Right. Thanks, Mamun. Noel, if I can move the same question to you, especially in the Philippines, we see there are many, let's say, new payment banks, new payment aggregators, You have the real estate companies who've come under this scanner now, as well as the casinos and gaming sector. What is your view on how business compliance can be handled, especially when you have on one end banks who are well versed with doing it for so many years, or the old financial institutions, and then the new set of covered persons. How can we enforce this? What's your view on this?
Yes. Well, first, we have to acknowledge that during transition of those organizations from being non-reporting entity, or here in the Philippines, non-covered person to covered persons, these entities may initially find it challenging to comply because, of course, there is no familiarity, and then there are several regulations. But I believe that as they become familiar with the regulations, with the proper coordination with our regulators, the AMLAC and the BSP for entities under the Bangko Sentral, then they will be more proactive than the maybe tick the box mentality, and they would have more initiatives to really comply in its essence, the regulations of our regulators, and not to simply comply for the sake of compliance, or maybe what we call paper compliance. Okay, so that is why it is important to build an effective culture of compliance between and among the teams inside the organization. So for me, it is important that the board and the management should first set the tone from the top. So what are our risks level or risk appetite? If there are risks, how are we going to address those risks? How are we going to address those gaps, of course? And then it is important also to engage all units, business units especially, when it comes to building a culture of compliance, because basically they are our first line of defense. So their inputs, their feedbacks with regard to policies, procedures, systems should be taken into consideration. So for me, I envision an engagement wherein it should be participative and then collaborative, and there is open communication between business units and the management and the board. And of course, there is tone from the top. Then it should be properly disseminated to all concerned inside the organization to ensure that they are made aware of those pronouncements. And to add to that, we have to make them more familiar. So there should be training and continuing awareness campaign or program to remind them of their obligations. And also, there is an importance of written policy and procedures so that there is one resource, one reference for everybody, and there is obligations. So in case there is violation, the system should have some form of accountability in case there is non-conformance of internal rules and, of course, the regulations. And I guess I want to emphasize this. Compliance team should also not be limited to just simply policing the units, but also compliance. For me, it is important that a compliance team should promote an understanding and culture regarding the importance of compliance. I believe that's the essence of compliance, on helping business units understand the regulations and help them comply with the regulations, full compliance for that matter.
Right. Thanks, Noel. Okay, let's take a quick audience poll before we move on to the next question. Can we have the first poll question displayed? All right. So, audience, if you can vote on this, and mention your choice. Has my institution's compliance culture over the last few years, has it improved? Has it stayed the same? Does it need work? Or I'm worried? let's just wait for a few seconds for some more answers to come in, and then we'll display it. All right, so it by and large looks like just about 1% are worried, about 9% feel that the compliance culture needs work, 10% feel that it stayed the same, and 80% feel that it has improved a lot. Are you able to, panelists, are you able to see the results? Can we have the results on screen?
Yes, yes.
All right, fantastic. So any comments from any of the panelists on the poll? I mean, does it reflect what's happening within your countries as well? This is, I mean, we've got participants from many countries here who have answered this poll. Do you think it's a reflection of your individual countries as well?
Like in case of Bangladesh, like Shirish, you know that Bangladesh technically they become compliant from FATF standards in 2016, and obviously we need to work on the effectiveness implementation part. And actually, over there the term compliance culture comes in. So we had our first regulation in 2002, and since that the local BFI has been working pretty much hard on that one, and actually they have some good practices which actually instill the culture of compliance in some of the events. Like, as you know, that we have a sort of an annual compliance Camel Coast conference where they've invited the CEOs, and nowadays they also started the task force meeting with the law enforcement agencies and the leading banks and the MFS companies. And whenever there is a sector-wise issues, like if it is on MFS side, if it is on trade side, if it is on agent banking side, they bring the respective heads with the Camelco to the meeting with the regulator, so that the business people also can get the feeling that what is the importance and gravity of the issue, and then the regulator also can get across the real challenges of the grassroots level from the business line people, so they can actually work hand in hand and give a solution to the emerging problems. So what I believe the culture in that sense has increased a lot, but obviously in some of the areas, like in terms of resourcing the compliance areas, in terms of bringing the business people in sort of penalties or some other areas, that maybe now is a concern for nowadays, whether we need to go that area. Thank you, Shirish.
Right. Noel and Boren, any comments on the poll results? Any observations?
I think this reflect well on Cambodian situation as well, and the obvious evidence is Cambodia's removal from the grey list recently in February by the FATF. So I think the removal was the results of everybody's effort in order to improve the compliance and also the obedience of the law and regulation in our country. So I think this is this reflects the situation in our country as well.
Thanks. Noel?
Yes. Here in the Philippines, well, especially if that the 80% is mostly comprised of Filipino participants, then it's a welcome development, especially that the Philippine government is working on exiting the gray list on the Philippines. So hopefully it becomes better and better, and eventually the Philippines will be removed from the gray list.
Right, thanks. Okay, let's move on to the next question that I have for you, and maybe Boren, let me ask you this question. I mean, building a healthy compliance culture actually comes with a lot of challenges, right? And it also has a lot of benefits. So how does developing a compliance culture within your bank or organization help manage risk while also increasing business opportunity? I mean, what would you say is the upside of having a good compliance culture, or making sure that your business teams are aware of all the rules?
Well, in Cambodia, there is a popular fairy tale about a man trying to catch the fish and then put put the fish in the basket carried by his wife, but that basket was perforated or leaking, so the fish were dropped back to the pond. So I usually use this metaphor to explain that catching the fish is the function of the business to earn revenue for the organization, while keeping the fish in the basket is the function of risk management, including compliance risk. So if risk management function performs like a leaking basket, then the revenue earned will be dropped back. And again, compliance is everyone's responsibility. Actually, in the fairy tale, both husband and wife should have been both accountable for the leaking basket. Same to the business. We need to develop an effective compliance culture in which everyone involved in the business activity feel empowered to take positive steps to ensure the organization remain compliant. And on top of that, if the organization is with good reputation of staying compliant, then I believe business has no much difficulty to get good customer, especially the multinational customer or investors, and not difficult to expand the business as well as to build and maintain relationship with counterparties, including the correspondent banks. Thank you.
Thanks, Boren. But I think many of the husbands in the audience, in the participants, are not going to be very happy because they are the ones who are at fault in your fairy tale. Right. Okay, Noel, any comments on this particular question? Is there any upside, and what is the upside? Would you say, in making sure that business compliance is done well?
Yes. Basically, there is. Well, first, organizations, especially financial institutions, are, of course, in the business of taking risks. So there is a need for an awareness of risks, especially compliance risks. So being aware of compliance risks would provide the company or businesses a guide or direction on how to move forward and how to get results from the business activities that they are taking in. So building an effective compliance culture will promote more business opportunities to the entity, since of course there are partners or potential partners, and basically we expect that our potential partners will only engage with an entity that is compliant. There is no issues regulatory or otherwise. And in terms of non-compliance, it will cost business. It may expose the entity to potential exposure and liabilities. And of course, it will definitely hinder the earning potentials of an entity. So in essence, a culture of compliance will help manage or mitigate, if not eliminate, risks related to any business activity of an entity, since it will at least mitigate, if not totally eliminate, any legal or regulatory exposure, penalties, or liabilities. And if there is no liabilities from the regulators, then those resources that supposedly would be used for complying with the penalties may be better used to doing other business, to engaging into another service, to entering into another engagement with other potential entities.
Right. Thanks, Noel. Well said. Okay, can we run one more quick poll? We have one more poll question. If I can ask that to be put up, please. All right. So, audience, if you can answer this quick poll question: does your institution have a business compliance officer in every branch or location? Right. So here the difference doesn't seem to be that stark. It's sort of 2/3, 1/3. I think 2/3 of the audience says that the institution, yes, it has a business compliance officer in every branch or location, whereas about 1/3 says that they do not. Let's give it another few seconds. Okay, can we share the results, please? Okay, so panelists, any quick reactions to the results of this poll? Would anyone like to comment? Maybe Boren, okay, I think Mamun has just unmuted himself.
As per the statutory guideline from the local BFIU, like they've actually made it compulsory for having a branch anti-money compulsory in each of the branches. So that is the statutory guideline. But what we have done as a best practice in most of the banks, like this centralized trade service operation, the centralized foreign remittance operations, the centralized trade operations, credit operations. So concerning but taking into the consideration of the credit-backed money laundering or trade-based money laundering. So we have also assigned some dedicated staff in central trade service unit and central credit monitoring unit and central fraud foreign remittance unit, so that they can also do some sort of a monitoring on behalf of us, and they have a sort of a dotted reporting line to us, so that they can escalate those concerns to us. So what I believe, like, having this sort of an formal or informal business compliance officer will help them also to detect the issues well in ahead, and also we can help them well in time.
Right, thanks, Mamun. Boren, is this a practice in Cambodia as well?
I think this is a fair division as well, because there are pros and cons of having the compliance team centralized or decentralized. It depends on the situation or status of the bank or financial institution, depends on the number of branches you have. Like, for example, if you have the centralized compliance team, then everything will be consistent and we can discuss with each other. And the decentralization may also bring the inconsistency in the decision making or whatever. But it depends on the status or situation of each and every financial institution.
Right. Noel, any comments on the results of the poll?
Yes, having a business compliance officer is a good practice, because we have saying that compliance is everyone's responsibility. So by having a person assigned on the first line of defense, the risk owner or the process owner, then there would be more collaboration, there is faster identification of risks, and hopefully there is faster mode of addressing those issues. Unlike if the compliance function, all of the compliance functions are stationed or assigned to central office compliance team, then there would be some challenges, perhaps, especially for big businesses, to immediately, depending on the urgency of the matter, address or report any issues. So in the Philippines, having business compliance officers is practiced, and then I believe it has been one of the best practices that we can definitely recommend to our participants right now.
Great, thanks. Noel, and while, so continuing with you, for business teams, compliance is usually not considered a priority, since it is seen sort of as a hindrance, for target achievement, or it's an additional responsibility, maybe an added cost. So, what are the, let's say again, best practices that you would suggest to ensure that, there is the right balance between compliance goals and business goals? And so if I can have your thoughts on that.
Yes. At first, it might be somewhat challenging to balance compliance matters and business. Some might argue that they typically clash. But for me, if there is a proper communication, basically tone from the top, then setting the level of risk appetite as to what level of risk that the company is capable of absorbing of or willing to absorb, then having the directive from the top, from our management and from the board, would help align the business goals with the regulatory or compliance expectations. So by having tone from the top or directive from the board and management, it is important to emphasize, coming from them, of course, that any business activity should be within the bounds of regulations. So it is also important for the board and the management to always have a foresight of balancing risks and controls. So there is risk, there is control. Okay. And this one, it is observed, or well, some, as far as I know, it is observed in fintech, having a pod or creation of a team wherein that team would be composed of representatives from compliance, of course, business units, technical units, and other units. The task of this team is basically to discuss, to identify possible risks, to provide gaps for any or prospective business that the company wants to engage in. So before the implementation, all of the risks are already identified at that level. Okay, so the representatives of this pod or team are staff or subordinates of another officer of a company. So when it comes to implementation and approval of the rollout of a service or a product or a system, there is already a first layer of identifying the issues. So when it comes to escalating it to the board and the management, all those issues, material issues for that matter, are supposedly addressed. And what the management and the board would do would to approve or to, well, check if there are other issues that haven't been considered by the pod or by the team. Also, I would like to emphasize that, again, business is a risk. So it is important to regularly conduct risk assessment. And of course, for AML, there is IRA, and then there is also risk assessment for new products, new service, new technology, etc., etc. And of course, there is enterprise risks. Okay, so those initiatives should be regularly conducted, and of course, it is expected that there would be risks identified. It could be material, or it may not be significant, but at the end of the day, those risks identified should be addressed, and those risk assessment, those actions taken should be regularly reviewed. Perhaps after the review, there might be some fine-tuning that the company should do to eventually mitigate any risks identified. And let's not forget that we should also put some checks and balances, or maybe internal, you can call it internal controls also. So by having those initiatives, the right balance between compliance and business may not be that challenging after all.
Right. Thanks, Noel. Mamun, you mentioned earlier that you involve the business teams and the heads of business when you have meetings with the FIU and with regulators, and this is one of the best practices, so that they understand also the seriousness of what is required from them. But so I would say that this is one of the best practices. But in addition to this, when it comes to dealing with the fact that sometimes the business side sees compliance as a hindrance for target achievement, what other best practice would you suggest to ensure that the right balance is there between compliance goals and business goals?
Thank you, Shirish. Like the issue is, like, to some extent, the distinction between the first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense are not that clear to the business line. So conventionally, whenever there is an issue of compliance, they think it's a work of compliance department. So let's push it to the compliance department. But we need to make it clear that the compliance is not the tick the box exercise. Like they can address it just the letter of the policy, but not the spirit of the policy. So to make it pretty much clear, so we need to break the policy in sort of an easy flowchart manner, and so that we can work with them when we devise the policy procedure in sort of a standard operating procedure, so that we can make it clear where is their role comes in and where we are going to help from compliance side. But compliance will be helping them, but compliance should not dictate each and every operational issues. They need to actually come to compliance. They have problem, but the compliance problem that needs to be addressed by them at the grassroots level. Like for an example, while opening an account, what are the requirements that needs to be followed? That needs to be pretty much clear in the policy procedure, and business people need to own that policy. Like if I don't do the due diligence at this very part, I will be rather be losing at the end, because that might be a sort of an bad loan at one stage. So it is for their own sake, for the credit point of view or from the trade point of view. So if they understand the benefit of doing the due diligence ahead, like then they can understand the sustainable business from their end. So that is why what we do, like whenever we ensure a compliance policy is cascaded down to them, we give a sort of an easy to follow a flowchart. And we also have that issue in table with the Central Compliance Committee meeting, where actually in Bangladesh, we have at least 10 to 15 business heads that joined in the meeting, so that we can have a healthy debate in the forum and build the policy procedure that is actually implementable. Like recently, the concern of distributing the stimulus packages during the pandemic corona, so government had distributed some of the stimulus packages to the business community, but sometimes it has been seen that they have not actually used that fund at the proper manner. So that is why Central Bank has come up there, like, this is not enough, like you have the required collateral with you, but you need to think about whether that fund is going to be utilized on the right purposes and whether he has the capacity to repay. So other predicate offenses needs to be brought into the picture. So we have developed a sort of an compliance chart. What are the issues that they need to think during disbursing of that credit facility to the customer? So thus actually we try to help them out. What are the significant compliance areas or concern areas that they need to cover for their betterment? Otherwise they will be penalized, or that loan will be defaulted, or they will be violating a sanction, or they will be the trade export process will not come. So we need to show them the concerns well in ahead, so that they see their benefit well in time.
Right.
Shirish.
Thanks, Mamun. Boren, maybe before we open up to audience Q&A, if I can ask you, are there any sort of best practices that you use in your bank, to make sure there's a good, balance between business and compliance? You're on mute, Boren.
Sorry.
No.
For me, it's not that the business team should have compliant mindset, but vice versa, the compliance team should also have business mindset. And compliance needs to understand the industry, the market, how the business works, in order to be able to provide effective regulatory advice to the business, and to ensure that the business stay compliant yet with simplified process and effective cost. They explain the importance of effective engagement between business and compliance team. And when the business and compliance teams share the same goal and mindset, I think everyone would have a better life. And I think how to have the effective engagement, both speakers have covered almost everything already. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. Okay, we are, I think, at the end of our time for the webinar today. But before we close, just a few quick announcements for participants in India on the webinar today. Our India AML CFT Summit, the 12th one, is coming up next Thursday. That's on the 11th of May. So if you've not yet registered, please go to our website and register. For participants in today's webinar who are from all diverse countries in Asia, our next Fintelekt certified AML CFT professional, the FCAP training program, will happen on the 8th and 9th of June in Bangkok. And contact my colleague Oliver. We can have his email ID put in the chat box in case you would like more information on that. Participants on today's webinar from Nepal, our workshop on business compliance, the full day workshop, will take place on the 16th of May in Kathmandu, and the Fintelekt and NBI AML Summit will take place in person on the 25th of May in Kathmandu. So any of you from Nepal today online who would like to attend, please contact our partner, the National Banking Institute, to register for any of these sessions. With that, we come to an end to today's webinar. Thank you so much to all our panelists who made this session so interesting and insightful. And thanks to all of the participants for their patient hearing and for posting so many questions. Thanks again to the Asian Bankers Association for partnering with Fintelekt for this webinar. So Boren, Mamun, and Noel, thank you so much for joining us. It was great having you here, and participants, have a great day ahead.
Thank you, Shirish, and thank you, Eva.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.